Okay, it's great to see everyone here on our first Zoom shir for our Parashat Hashavua series. And I just hope everyone is well and safe during this challenging time for us all, even though the shul physical plant, the shul building is closed, but our operations, our services, our programs are up and running and going strong. And so it's a pleasure to be able to draw strength from our tradition and connect to the mitzvah of learning Torah together via technology. So in this week's parsha, we have a parsha. It's actually a double parsha of Vayakel Pekudei, and also we have the special portion of HaChodesh Hazel Lachem. And the parsha begins, Vayakel Moshe et kol adat b'nei Yisrael v'yomer alehem, Ela hadvar asher tziva Hashem la'asot otam. Moshe gathers together the people of Israel, and he has something important to teach them. And Rashi says that this occurred on the day after Yom Kippur, when Moshe comes down from the mountain. Moshe came down from the mountain with the second luchot and a message of forgiveness for the Jewish people that they'd been forgiven for the golden calf. And he teaches them about the mitzvah of Shabbat. The pasuk says, Sheshet yamim te'asem lacha. For 6 days they should do work. And on the seventh day should be a holy day, Shabbat Shabbaton, a day of rest. So just one thing interesting about the mitzvah of Shabbat is that it's not that the Torah ever commands the Jewish people just rest on the seventh day, but the mitzvah is always taught in the context of the first 6 days. First it says, work for 6 days, Sheshet Yamim Te'asem Lacha. 6 days you have to be creative, you have to work, you have to try to improve the world. And then on the seventh day, you rest from being creative, you accept the world for the way it is. And of course, you have the mitzvah of Shabbat. Similarly, Rav Soloveitchik points out that the very first mitzvah that was given to mankind was not that they shouldn't eat from the Eitz Hadat Tov Hara, from the tree of knowledge of good and evil. Rather, the first mitzvah is Mikol Eitz Hagan Tochal, that they were given the permission and almost obligation, mandate, to be able to enjoy the pleasures of the other trees of the garden. So the first mitzvah that was given to Adam and Chava in Gan Eden was actually to enjoy the other trees of the garden and don't eat from the Eitz Hadat Tov Hara, from the tree of knowledge. In a somewhat similar fashion, the Torah doesn't just come out and say, don't do work on Shabbat, but rather 6 days of the week you're permitted to work, and actually you have an obligation to try to improve the world and be creative. And then on the seventh day, again, you appreciate the world for the way it is, and you keep the mitzvah of Shabbat. Why does Moshe gather the Jewish people and teach them right over here about the mitzvah of Shabbat? So one possibility is that it's connected to the story that happens previously, which is the story of the golden calf. And indeed, not only do you have the mitzvah of Shabbat over here right after the golden calf, but the mitzvah of Shabbat is mentioned right before the whole episode of the golden calf. The mitzvah of Shabbat serves as bookends for the episode of the golden calf. And perhaps there's a deeper meaning there and the message in that relationship between Shabbat and the Ched Egel. Perhaps Shabbat is the antidote or the opposite to the golden calf. The golden calf was a focus on the physical. According to some commentaries, it was built to be a physical manifestation of God, and therefore kind of downright avodah zarah, idolatry. According to many interpretations, it wasn't intended to be a physical manifestation of God, but rather a physical representation of Moshe, right? Because they were very reliant on Moshe, who took them out of Egypt. Moshe was now up on Har Sinai for 40 days, and they didn't realize, what had happened to him and whether he was coming back. And so the Ramban seems to understand that in this way, that the calf, as terrible as it was, and as misguided as it was, but it wasn't downright avodah zarah, but rather it was meant to be a substitute for Moshe. However you understand it, whether it's a physical representation of God or a physical representation of Moshe, it was a focus on the physical. But the Jewish people felt that they needed a physical conduit through which to connect to God. And certainly the material of gold, the material possessions played a central role in the fashioning of the golden calf. And what Shabbat comes along and teaches us is that it's really not about the physical world, and it's not only about what is visible, but Shabbat reminds us about those things that are invisible and that are not physical, but rather spiritual. You have the values of tradition, the spiritual connection with God and with Torah. And Shabbat also connects us with those things that are not just physical, like family and community and tradition. And so perhaps Shabbat is placed specifically prior to the golden calf and after the golden calf to teach us that Shabbat is the antidote to the golden calf. Throughout the week, we focus a lot on the physical world around us. We utilize our possessions and try to fashion and shape the physical world. And then in Shabbat, we shut off our electronic devices, we disconnect from the physical world, and we connect to the spiritual. So while the egel, the golden calf, is more of a focus on the physical, Shabbat is a turn towards that which is not always visible and a turn towards the spiritual. Perhaps that's the reason why Shabbat appears as the first section of our parsha. Now, another reason why the Shabbat appears here is not because of its connection to the golden calf, but rather because of the connection to the Mishkan, right? The command, the blueprint to build the Mishkan appears in Parshiyot Truma Tetzaveh, and now in these upcoming two Parshiyot of Vayakel Pekudei, it's the execution of the plan and it's the building of the Mishkan. So prior to the building of the Mishkan, we have the mitzvah of Shabbat. So one reason why the Shabbat is here is because of its relationship to the Cheder Egel, as we just discussed. But perhaps Shabbat is here also because of its relationship to the Mishkan. All the activities the sages learned and have a tradition that all the activities that were utilized in building the Mishkan were the activities that are forbidden on Shabbat. And there were 39 different malachot, arba'im chasar achat. There were 39 malachot utilized in fashioning and shaping the sanctuary of God, of the Mishkan. And it's those specific activities, those 39 malachot, that are forbidden on Shabbat. But also Rashi teaches us that the reason why Shabbat comes here prior to the building of the Mishkan was to teach us she'eina dochet haShabbat, that the building of the Mishkan was not allowed to take place on Shabbat, which of course is related to the fact that those things that were used to build the Mishkan are forbidden on Shabbat. But in a more general sense, this major project of the building of the Mishkan did not override the Shabbat. And perhaps the message over here is that the ends don't always justify the means. And even though the end here was this noble, grand project of building the Mishkan, but the process of building needed to be done honestly, with integrity. The funds needed to be from kosher funds, so to speak, but also it was not allowed to be built on Shabbat. So a Shabbat takes precedence over the Mishkan, and the Mishkan doesn't override the building of the Shabbat, and it teaches us that idea. It's one manifestation of that idea, that the ends don't justify the means. And we know that if a person steals a lulav, for example, to perform the mitzvah, not only did you violate the prohibition of stealing, but Chazal understood that you're not in fulfillment of the mitzvah. That when you are involved in immoral or unethical means, that's going to undermine the fulfillment or the achievement of the end. And so Shabbat is here prior to Mishkan to say that, yes, you must build the Mishkan, but it has to be done in the proper way, and certainly not in a violation of Shabbat. Now, Vayakel Pekudei is really a recapitulation of Truma and Tetzaveh. And rabbis have a little bit of a challenge to try to make these parshiyot interesting, because it is really just a repeat of Truma and Tetzaveh in large part. So the question is why, once we have the whole blueprint and discussion of the building in Truma Tetzaveh, a couple of parshiyot ago, why is it necessary for us to have this entire section of Vayakel Pekudei? So one possibility is that there's really there is a difference in the order of the sections in Vayakel Pekudei. we mentioned this in Shul a couple of weeks ago, that by Truma and Tetzaveh, so the Aron, the ark, and the table, and the menorah are mentioned first, and then you have the walls of the sanctuary. Here in Parashat Vayakel, in the building of the Mishkan, so if you're following along in an Art Scroll Chumash, so it mentions first on page 522, Perek Lamed Vav Pasuk Chaf, it mentions the building of the walls of the Mishkan first, and then it has the ark, the table, and the candelabra. So why the change in order? And the rabbis in the Gemara say that this was a debate between Moshe and the chief architect of the Mishkan, where Moshe presented it as the ark, table, candelabra first, and then the walls. And then the chief architect responded and said that usually when you build a house, you build the walls first, and then you bring the furniture and appliances inside. And if I build the ark and the table and the candelabra and the other utensils, and I don't have a wall, I don't have a structure, so then where am I going to put the appliances? And it must be that God told you that you should build the wall first. Isn't that true, Moshe, that God said it to you that way? And Moshe at that point said, it must be that you were in the shadow of God, B'Tsalel, and you're indeed correct that that's the way God told me to do it, that he told me first to build the wall and then to build the utensils of the Mishkan. So firstly, this is an interesting account as to how the chief architect got his name of B'Tsalel, by recognizing that you needed to have a process of building the Mishkan in which he built the walls first and then put in the utensils. But secondly, what's really going on here is a debate between Moshe and B'Tsalel. Perhaps Moshe was focusing on the ultimate purpose of the Mishkan. And we know that when you begin a project, you have to think about the end goal. And once you have an end goal, what are the steps that you need to take to reach that goal? This is one of Stephen Covey's principles, which is that you should begin with the end in mind. And so Moshe felt that it was necessary to speak about the purpose or the holiest items of the Mishkan. So he mentions the Aron, because the Aron is the place upon which Hashem communicates with Moshe and Bnei Israel. And the Aron, of course, is the repository of the Luchot and of the Sefer Torah. You had the first broken Luchot in the Aron, you had the second intact Luchot in the Aron, and then there was a Sefer Torah as well that was either in the Aron or on a shelf right attached to the Aron. So the Aron is the holiest item in the Mishkan. It's found in the Holy of Holies. And you might say that that's the ultimate purpose of the Mishkan, which is to attain achievement in Torah and closeness with Hashem. And so Moshe, in presenting the Mishkan to Bnei Israel, he said, you have to remember the purpose. This is our goal in terms of all of our activities and the mitzvahs that we're doing and the activities that we're doing as a community. Right? We have to remember our ultimate goal, and that's to connect with Hashem, and that's to develop a closeness with Torah. And of course, we become better people and we impact the world. So Moshe was focusing on purpose. And B'Tsalel said, I understand the purpose, Moshe, but you need to have a community, you need to have an infrastructure in which the Torah can flourish. And perhaps the walls of the Mishkan represents that infrastructure and that community that one needs to have. And once you have that infrastructure and you have that community setting, so that's when a person can thrive in Torah and in mitzvos and in character. So perhaps that's why the Torah reviews the section in part to teach us that there's a different order of how it's built, and it was actually built differently than the way Moshe presented it. Moshe presented it in one way, B'Tsalel presented it in a different way. Ultimately, Moshe agreed with B'Tsalel and said, it must be that you're in the shadow of God to have realized that. Another possibility as to why this section is repeated and why it goes through the whole building of the Mishkan was to teach Bnei Israel a very important lesson. That yes, they committed a sin with the golden calf, but the covenant is eternal and they still have a relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And it was necessary to go through all the different details of the building to say that there's still the relationship, and the project that was mentioned and was commanded prior to the Egel is still a viable project, and it's still something that Hashem wants to do, which is to dwell His presence among the Jewish people, even after the Chet Egel. And so Vayakal Pekudei represent these parshiot of a second chance, of a restoration of the relationship between Hashem and Bnei Israel, even though they had fallen drastically and radically with the golden calf. But look, you have all the details, you have all the mitzvot of the Mishkan that still apply, and the project and the relationship continues. A third idea is, in terms of why is it necessary to recapitulate here in Vayakal Pekudei. Again, one idea is because really B'Tzal presents a different order. The second possibility is to teach us that the Jewish people were forgiven, and it teaches all of us that even if we part at first and things don't go our way, but HaKadosh Baruch Hu and the world gives us, HaKadosh Baruch Hu gives us a second chance. We try our best to learn from our experiences, our mistakes, and grow from them. So here, Vayakal Pekudei is post the sin of the golden calf, but there's the restoration of the relationship, and the Jewish people are forgiven. They have the second luchot, and they are able to build the Mishkan. But perhaps the third idea is that it's teaching us the value of action. That you could have ideas, you could have a vision, you could have strategy sessions, but ultimately it comes down to getting the job done. And you need to have both. You need to have a vision and a strategy, and have a game plan, but also you have to be willing to spring into action and get things done. But you can't have one without the other. One mitzvah that highlights this is tefillin, where you have the tefillin shel yad and you have the tefillin shel rosh, and you're not supposed to interrupt when putting on those two. Right? When a man puts on tefillin, he says a bracha on the yad, says a bracha on the rosh, and you're not supposed to interrupt between the two. And the reason is because there has to be a relationship always between action and thought. Your actions should be thought through in advance, and when you have ideas and you come to a conclusion as to what's important, then you have to put it into action. And so the two elements of the tefillin highlight that integration and synthesis between thought and action, and perhaps that's why the parshiot publish all these additional psukim to teach us about the building the Mishkan, because it wasn't just enough to talk about the planning, but now in our parsha it says the word vayas, that they actually went ahead and got the job done, because your great thoughts have to be implemented and channeled into action. I once heard from the Lubavitcher Rebbe that greater than 1,000 ideas is one action. And that's an important message for all of us during these trying times, which is that everyone has all different types of ideas about how to help out other community members and what are the things that we should be doing. But it's a great level that a person could reach to say, okay, I'm going to take action. I'm going to volunteer to help make a phone call or deliver food. And I'm going to sign up for that WhatsApp group for the Chesed Volunteers of Beth Jacob, or another volunteer group, because I understand that it's not just about vision and ideas and philosophy, but we're a religion of action as well. Okay. Now, in the building of the Mishkan, so we have the building of the walls, as I said, comes first. All right, so we spoke about the mitzvah of Shabbos, why it appears here. We spoke, generally speaking, about why this whole parsha of Parshiot of Vayakal Pekudei is necessary, and we gave 3 ideas. Now I wanted to talk about the walls of the Mishkan. The pasuk in Perek Lamed Vav, pasuk Chaf. So there's an interesting way the word krashim is mentioned. It says, Vayas et hakrashim la Mishkan. Now, with regards to most of the other items of the Mishkan, it says, V'yasu et aron, right? It says that, and especially in Truma Tetzaveh, when it introduces the different items, say, like make the aron, or make the shulchan. In this case, by the krashim, Rashi points this out in Parashat Truma, but it's also here in Parashat Vayakel, is that it says you should build the planks of the Mishkan. And Rashi, I believe the Rashi appears in Parashat Truma, says that these planks were not just regular lumber that was purchased from Anawalt lumber from the lumber yard. But these were planks of wood that were specially designated for the purpose of building the Mishkan. And Rashi teaches us in Truma that it was Yaakov. It was Yaakov who planted these trees in Mitzrayim, and he told the Jewish people that there's going to be a time that you're going to come out of Egypt and you're going to build a Mishkan, and you're going to use these trees for the building of the Mishkan. Where did Yaakov get these trees from? So the Medrash says that this is why when Yaakov was going down to Mitzrayim, he stops in Beersheba. In Parashat Vayigash, it says that he went to Beersheba and he offered sacrifices and prayers over there. The Medrash says, why did he specifically make a pit stop and a stop for gas or make sacrifices in Beersheba? So Rashi says because it was to gather up the Eshel, the trees that Avram had planted in Beersheba. The pasuk says, "Vayita Eshel biBeersheba," and so Yaakov, on his way down to Mitzrayim, went and gathered those trees that Avram had planted in Beersheba. What did Avram do with those trees? What was the purpose of those trees? So Rashi tells us in Parshat Vayera that Eshel stands for Achila, Shetiya, and Lina. Eating, drinking, and lodging. And so Avraham provided hospitality to all the travelers and to his family and friends and to travelers in that orchard of trees. So what an amazing odyssey of the wood of the Mishkan, that the wood that was used for the walls of the Mishkan wasn't just any wood, but rather it was specially designated for that purpose. And it was wood that was designated years earlier by Yaakov, that Yaakov had planted in Mitzrayim. And Yaakov had received that wood, had gathered that wood from Beersheba, where it was originally planted by Abraham. What an amazing odyssey of the wood. And it teaches us, I think, at least two lessons. The first lesson is that what we do today is not in a vacuum, but rather is part of a link that goes back generations. And when a person observes Shabbat and keeping kosher and mezuzah and all the different mitzvot, you're observing a mitzvah that has been observed by generations of Jews going all the way back to Sinai. And that's something very, very powerful, that we have a tradition that we're a link in. And so we have a responsibility to receive that tradition, preserve it, follow it, and transmit it to the next generation. And with the building of the Mishkan as well, it wasn't just built with any wood, but rather it was a Masorah, right? The wood was from Yaakov, which was all the way back from Avraham. With regards to the building of the Mishkan and our modern day Mishkan of the Beit HaKnesset, it's based upon tradition that goes back generations, which is very empowering, very exciting, and really puts upon us a responsibility. And the second idea is that if the Krashim are from Yaakov, which really represent hope, right? Because Yaakov coming down to Mitzrayim said there's going to be a time that we're going to be coming out of here. So the trees, the Mishkan is a source of hope for the Jewish people, that even when we go through trying times of uncertainty, such as today, that we're filled with hope and optimism and belief in Hashem, because ultimately that belief in Hashem, it's Hashem who's going to protect us and carry us through. So the wood of the Mishkan represents hope, but also the wood of the Mishkan and of the Shul represents hospitality, right? Because Avram provided hospitality with that wood in Beersheba. And that's a message for all of us, that building the Mishkan and building our Beit Knesset and Batei Medrash, it should always be pulsating with the hospitality of Avraham. The wood of the Mishkan, figuratively speaking, the wood of our Mishkan, right, takes us all the way back to Avram, and that's what animates everything we do, which is chesed and hachnasat orchim and hospitality and kindness. The shul is not just a center for tefillah between us and Hashem, but it's also a center of bein adam lechavero, taking us all the way back to Avram. It's pulsating with the hospitality of Avram. That Eshel goes to Yaakov, to the Mishkan, to the modern day Mishkan. Now, with the building of the Mishkan, so by Revi of Vayakel, Perek Lamed Vav Pasuk Zayin, something remarkable about the building of the Mishkan. So this was a major fundraising building campaign where the donations were excessive. Moshe had to tell the Jewish people that you've given enough, stop giving. This is every fundraiser or every rabbi or every head of school's dream, that we're going to have to tell people to stop giving because we have too many donations. I don't know if that's going to ever happen here at Beth Jacob. Who knows? Maybe it will. But that's what happened with the building of the Mishkan. It says, "Vayomer el Moshe perek lamed vav pasuk hey, Vayomer el Moshe le'mor marbim ha'am la'avi," that the nation is bringing an excessive amount, more than what's necessary. So Moshe sent out a message to the camp saying, "Stop giving." Vayikolei ha'am mehavi, and the nation stops giving. V'hamalacha hayta dayam l'chol hamalacha la'asota tavahuter. So I wanted to just focus on that pasuk, which is quite interesting, where it says that after Moshe Rabbeinu told the Jewish people to stop giving, it says that all the work for the Mishkan was sufficient, was dayam, l'chol hamalacha la'asota tavahuter, and it was extra. So that seems to be an internal contradiction of sorts, because which one was it? If it's dayam, dayam is from the word dayenu, so that means it's exact. Vahoter means from the word yoter, that means extra. So if you had extra, then of course you had sufficient. And secondly, it seems like you might even say that there's a contradiction between those two words of dayam vahoter. If it's exact, then it's not extra, and if it's extra, it's not exact. So I saw two different interpretations about this pasuk, where one interpretation is that really the donations to the Mishkan was vahoter, and that there was so much coming in that it was an excessive amount that it was almost impossible for Moshe Rabbeinu to use all the items that came in. The problem is, at that point, is that some of the Jews might become distraught and depressed that their donations, whether it was contributions of money, of gold and silver, or the contributions of the woven tapestries, they'll despair and be distraught and depressed that their donations were not utilized in the building of the Mishkan. And so one interpretation here is that really the donations were excessive, but dayam, it was presented to the Jewish people as if it was really crucial and necessary for everyone's contribution. Every single person's donation and contribution to the Mishkan was indispensable, was at least somehow conveyed to the Jewish people as such, or was made to be as such, that even though in truth it was vahoter, it was extra, but it was a statement to the Jewish people that your contribution was still necessary. You play an indispensable role in the community. The second interpretation is almost the opposite, which is that no, really the contribution to the Mishkan was sufficient and exact as to what was necessary. The problem is that if that were the case, then someone might reach the conclusion and say, it was because of me that the Mishkan was built. I'm the one who built the Mishkan, and it could lead to a certain haughtiness or arrogance on the part of the people that without me it wouldn't have happened, and I built the Mishkan. And so really, in fact, it was sufficient, but vahoter was presented to be vahoter to instill humility on the part of the Jews. And I'd like to suggest, sort of to combine these two ideas, that this provides a blueprint for Jewish communal engagement. That on the one hand, a person should always have this perspective of dayam, which is that it's exact, and that I am indispensable. I have a unique personality with unique talents and also resources, and I must contribute to the community. I must contribute to whatever the project that's being discussed. I must contribute to Medinat Yisrael. And your actions are indispensable to the Jewish people and to the community. And so just like the Mishkan was. So v'hamalacha hatadayam, it was exact, it was sufficient, and it's necessary. However, at the same time, as we recognize that our actions are indispensable and are necessary, we should always approach holy matters and mitzvot with a sense of humility. And so we need to integrate dayam vahoter. We have to hold on to both of those values. We have to move forward, recognizing that I need to act because my actions are crucial, and without me, it's not going to happen. It's dayam. But at the same time, vahoter, you know what? Just like Mordechai said to Esther, that if you don't take action, revach v'hatzola yamar laYehuda makom acher, salvation is going to come to the Jewish people from somewhere else. So we should always approach matters of holiness and mitzvot with a sense of humility. Ultimately, we're under God's control, and anything that we're involved in, we need the teamwork and participation of so many others. So with the building of the Mishkan and with everything we're involved in, it should always be with that synthesis and that those two qualities of dayam vahoter. Now, in Parashat Pekudei talks about the accounting of everything that came in. So in addition to the building of the Mishkan, because there was an incredible amount of funds, of gold, silver, copper, and all different types of materials that were coming in, so there needed to be an accounting of the items that came in. And so that's the beginning of Parashat Pekudei, where it says, Eila Pekudei HaMishkan, Mishkan HaEdut Asher Pukad Al Pi Moshe. The following are the reckonings and the accountings of the donations and contributions that were given to the Mishkan. And firstly, this is interesting when it comes to a Jewish institution, that you need to have proper accounting, and there's accountability. And this was the case also by the building of the Mishkan, where it was necessary to show the Jews and for the leadership to make sure that everyone understood where the money went to and how it was spent, and that everything added up. Now, the Medrash highlights something interesting where it says, "Vahi ma'at kikar kesef," that there was 100 kikar kesef that was used for the sockets of the Mishkan. There were 100 sockets of the Mishkan, and then there was an additional amount of money. And so I like to thank Rabbi J.J. Schachter for making me aware of this Medrash, where the Medrash says that when Moshe Rabbeinu was counting all the silver, so they knew that the 100 talents of silver had gone towards the 100 talents of silver had gone towards the sockets of the Mishkan, but they were wondering there were 1,775 additional shkalim that were unaccounted for. And people started asking questions. And they were wondering that if he just needed the 100 talents of silver, which I believe is like 100,000 shkalim, no, it's actually more than 100,000 shkalim. It was a total of around 300,000 shkalim. And so in addition to the 100 talents of silver, so they had this additional money that came in as revenue, but nobody knew how it was spent. And the Medrash says that some of the Jews started questioning Moshe and becoming suspicious that perhaps, as crazy as it sounds, Moshe had pocketed the 1,775 shkalim. And the pasuk then says, "V'yata elef ushva hameot v'chamisha v'shivim asa vavim la'amudim v'tzipor Hashem v'chishakotam." That there were 100 talents of silver that were used for the 100 sockets, and the 1,775 shkalim were used for the hooks of the Mishkan. And the Medrash says that it was almost like divine providence that guided the eyes of the Jewish people to recognize these silver hooks that were used to connect the different parts of the Mishkan. And firstly, it's just interesting and incredible that people were questioning the integrity of Moshe, and that there are no leaders who are above the law and are above suspicion. And but of course, it's necessary for the Jews, hopefully, to give Moshe the benefit of the doubt and to give leaders the benefit of the doubt until proven otherwise. But at least you see from here that the Jewish people were suspecting that perhaps Moshe had taken the money for himself. But secondly, these hooks of the Mishkan are very interesting, because at first the Jewish people didn't notice them. Only after the divine providence kind of guided their eyes to see them, that's when they realized the hooks of the Mishkan. And the hooks are called vavin, because a vav is shaped a little bit like a hook, right? It's a straight, and then it's curved at the end. So a hook is called a vav, and a vav is utilized in Hebrew to connect, right? It's used to connect two different topics. Ve'ela ha-mishpatim connects mishpatim. Vav is and it connects two topics. And the vav is a hook that connects different items. And perhaps this is signifying the idea that in our lives there are different things that hook us and connect us together, and we don't realize it. These are the hidden hooks that connect all of us together as members of Am Yisrael. And sometimes we overlook these hooks and these connections that we have with one another and these blessings that we have, but we have to always remember to appreciate the vavim that connect all of us. The Jewish people almost forgot about the vavim, but really the 1,775 shkalim went towards the vavim that connected the Mishkan together. And it's a message for all of us to always appreciate the different things that connect us to our families, our connections that we have to our community, the connection that we have with Hashem, and the connection we have with the state of Israel, the connection we have with the entire world. On the one hand, we're a part as a nation from the world, but we're also a part of the world. We share this planet with other people. And so those hooks are crucial. We sometimes forget about them and focusing just on ourselves, but those hooks are crucial in us understanding our place in the world, that we have, and we're blessed with all these hooks and with all these connections to others. After Cain murders Hevel, so Cain was forced to wander, and there was a sign that was placed on Cain's forehead. And what was the sign? So the Medrash says that there was a vav that was placed on his forehead. Why a vav? Because when Cain murders Hevel, he thought it was just about himself, and he committed a terrible crime of murdering his brother. So he was focused just on himself in an extreme fashion. He didn't understand the lesson of the vav, that it's not just you, but it's you and someone else. And we have to be there for one another. And we have connections in all these different concentric circles that are part of who we are and part of the blessings that we have. And so that's why Cain needed to have that vav on his forehead to teach him that lesson, to teach all of us that lesson, that we're really all interconnected. Those are the Parshat of Vayakel and Pekudei, and I wanted to just touch upon the Parsha of HaChodesh Hazeh Lachem. This week is Parshat HaChodesh. So in addition to the double Parsha of Vayakel Pekudei, we read from Parshat Bo. And in Parshat Bo, we receive the very first mitzvah that's given to the Jewish people of HaChodesh Hazeh Lachem Rosh Chadashim. And then immediately after that, the Jewish people are told to take a lamb on the 10th day, hold on to the lamb for 4 days, at which time they were supposed to slaughter it. This required great courage on the part of the Jewish people to sacrifice the lamb, which was considered the deity of the Egyptians. And especially with their slave mentality, as slaves for many, many years, this was very, very difficult for the Jewish people to do. But what they do is they go ahead and they take the lamb on the 10th. It was supposed to be a safeguarding until the 14th day of the month, at which time they splashed the blood on the doorposts. Why was it necessary, though, for the Jewish people to hold on to the animal for 4 days? Because why take it on the 10th and only slaughter it on the 14th? One possibility is because this is like all sacrifices, which had to be free of blemishes. And the standard protocol when it came to sacrifices is that you had to check the animal for 4 days to make sure that it was free of any blemishes. And that's why the Jewish people had to take it for 4 days and then offer it on the 14th. But the other possibility is perhaps that the need for the Jewish people to take it for 4 days was because for so many years they'd been treated not just as second-class citizens, but almost like animals by the Egyptians. And because the Egyptians perceived them as animals, that's why when the midwives were saving the babies, and they say to Paro that the Jewish people are like chayot, and that's why they give birth so quickly, because they're like ki chayotena, because they're like animals, and that's why Paro and the Egyptians believed that claim of the midwives, because this is the way they perceived the Jewish people, like animals. And after being treated for so long in that way, it was inevitable that the Jewish people themselves started to perceive of themselves as inferior human beings. And so part of the process of Yetziat Mitzrayim and what's happening in Parshat Bo is not just that we're punishing the Egyptians with the plagues. And it's not only that it's a way to free the Jewish people, but they needed to restore the dignity of the Jewish people. They needed to take this people that had been beaten, enslaved, persecuted, and to get them to raise up a level and to recognize that they're now going to be a free people with a relationship with God, who has a noble people of nobility, who are like princes. And this is the logic of some of the details of the Paschal lamb of this karban, right? Right, one law is that it had to be eaten grilled. Another law is that you needed reservations. A third law is that you're not allowed to break a bone of the karban Pesach. And the Sefer HaChinuch says that all these laws connect to the fact that the purpose of the karban Pesach was to restore the dignity of the Jew, to remind us that we're a special people, we're a noble people. In case you ever forgot it, that you have to remember that. And so that's why you have to eat the karban grilled, because the Sefer HaChinuch says, because grilled was the most elegant way to have food. And number two, that's why you're not allowed to break any bones of the karban, because it's the custom of peasants, of poor, to eat every shred of meat and to even break the bones. But an aristocratic, dignified person doesn't break the bones while they're eating the karban or any meal. And thirdly, that's why you need reservations, because when you have a fancy party and a royal affair, royal dinner, so you need to have reservations. You need to have RSVPs, and that's why if a person does an RSVP for the karban Pesach, so that disqualifies. You're disqualified. You need to have RSVPs to fulfill the mitzvah of the karban Pesach. So what I'd like to suggest, based on that Sefer HaChinuch, where he explains the laws in that way, I'd like to suggest maybe that's why the Jewish people have to hold on to the animal for 4 days. That they were told to take the animal and not just do it in hiding, in private, in the basement, but take it and publicize it and advertise it and be proud of it. Be proud of it because you're the Jewish people and you have a relationship with Hashem. And so that's why they were told to take the animal for 4 days to restore the dignity of the Jew, to remind him who he or she is, what our goal is, our mission, and that we have a special covenant with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The story is told about the rabbi who was invited to the royal banquet, the royal English banquet, and the rabbi responded that I cannot attend the banquet because I eat kosher. They said, we'll serve kosher food. He said, I need also kosher dishes. They said, we'll provide kosher dishes. So it came time, Prince Charles was there, Duke of Edinburgh, other royal officials were there. And after the first course, the lights went off and on. And the man turned to his neighbor and said, why are they going off and on? And he said, because you have to now change seats. So he said, oh my gosh, because his dishes, he had special dishes that had a sticker under them to show that they were kosher. But now he has to change seats. What is he going to do? So he picks up his dishes and he goes to another place. And then it happens again where the lights go off and on. And again, he picks up the dishes and goes to another place. And another Jew who happened to be there said, what are you doing, Rabbi? You're embarrassing us. You're carrying your dishes around. That's not appropriate. And the rabbi responded, but this is keeping kosher. And when we have to keep kosher. At the end of the meal, when everyone was saying goodbye to the royal officials and the rabbi came to Prince Charles, the prince asked him, why did you why were you carrying your dishes? So he explained to him about the rules of keeping kosher. And the prince said, oh, I didn't know that in addition to keeping kosher, you have to have kosher dishes. Can you explain to me more? And when the other Jew came by and he saw that the prince had befriended the rabbi and they had this whole conversation. So this other Jew who had originally said to the rabbi, don't carry around your dishes, he said to Prince Charles, he said, I'm Jewish too. And Prince Charles said, so where are your dishes? And so this is a reminder to all of us, the where are your dishes, to be proud of our dishes, to be proud of our keeping kosher, to be proud of our traditions. And that's certainly one lesson of the book of Shemot, which is the Jewish people go in the book of Shemot. We finished Shemot this week. We go from exile to redemption. The redemption is only complete with the building of the Mishkan, because that's when we have the renewed presence of Hashem among the people of Israel. And the story is not just a story of us being freed, but it's a story of the restoration of our dignity. It's a story of receiving forgiveness for the golden calf, because there are second chances. And it's and Vayakel, Pekudei, and Bo has this common theme of restoration, of forgiveness, and a renewal of our dignity. And every single person, every one of us, should be always proud of our mitzvah, of our tradition that we have the privilege to observe. We should never be embarrassed about saying a bracha or doing a mitzvah, because this is our lifeblood. And if we do it and we follow the mitzvah, even when difficult, and we're proud of it, then that's how we're going to earn the respect of all others, including the non-Jews, when we keep the mitzvah and follow our principles, even when difficult, under all circumstances. And as a final note, if we continue to draw strength from tradition and continue to pray to Hashem and think about being reflective and introspective, we're going to get through this difficult time as well and emerge even stronger. Shavua Tov, and thank you so much for learning together.